On this episode of Art Loft, the film Remembering Surrounded Islands.
35 years ago, Christo and Jeanne-Claude unfurled one of their greatest works, 11 islands in Biscayne Bay surrounded by hot pink fabric.
But the project faced a mountain of opposition.
This film from the Pérez Art Museum Miami and filmmakers Jonathan David Kane and Lisa Leone is the story of how Christo and Jeanne-Claude moved that mountain.
We hope you enjoyed it. Check it out.
Crime in Miami is up and tourism is down. When tourism is down, so is South Florida's economy. The city looks peaceful and prosperous from here. A new luxury hotel over there at Brickell Point, construction cranes on the skyline over there at Ball Point. But tourism officials are deeply worried, and they held an emergency meeting this morning to try to map plans to revive the flagging tourism business. They want to make Miami Paradise Regained, as opposed to what Time magazine this week calls Paradise Lost.
Miami in 1980 and 81 was a rough and tumble place, kind of raw around the edges, but so exciting. A city that was kind of finding its identity, fighting crime, trying to assimilate 125,000 Cubans. There had been the Mariel boat lift.
This wasn't the Miami that I grew up in Puerto Rico thinking of, the Miami of Frank Sinatra, Maurice Lapidus, the Fontainebleau Hilton, Sammy Davis Jr., Bonnie Yeager. I arrived to Miami that have sort of like forgotten its past.
And suddenly this artist and his wife, this couple came along and said, hey, we want to put some pink cloth around the islands in Biscayne Bay. And people generally said, what? For what reason?
And we became like giant flowers floating in that water for 14 days.
Almost like real water lily. Instead to be green, they will be pink, and the tree will be acting like a flower.
Using 6.5 million square feet of beautiful floating pink fabric on the surface of the water.
Why pink? Why iridescent pink especially?
Probably this is one of the most painterly projects I ever do.
Painterly?
Yes. All other projects, you see the color slides, they was mostly like sculpture, structure. When the surrounded islands, we're working on surface, flat surface, and the pink color, I find it the most exciting, artificial, in the same way most beautiful with the water and the bay, with the sky, and with the tropical vegetation on the islands.
Jan van der Mark, who was the first director of the Center for the Fine Arts, had convinced Christo and Jeanne-Claude that they should come to Miami and see what's going on down here.
The Center for the Fine Arts was a really wonderful art museum and Kunsthal concept that it would be a place where great art would be bought and great exhibitions would be. The Center for the Fine Arts was an applicant for the Christo project. And given the fact that it was controversial, it means quite a bit that an art institution would do that. The Center for the Fine Arts is now known as Pérez Art Museum, PAMM.
Van der Mark wanted visibility for the new Center for the Fine Arts, which was almost finished. And he had contacts with artists from all over the world. And one of his contacts was the Christos. So he decided, you know, bringing the Christo down. He didn't know if Christo was going to like doing a project here, you know. He might come and visit and say goodbye.
Everyone assumed that they were going to wrap a building because that's what they did. And nobody knew what it would be, but they thought, the wrapped Freedom Tower, the old Miami Beach City Hall, the Biltmore. Christo and Jeanne-Claude met me at the Miami Herald, which was then right next to the Venetian Causeway, across from where the Art Center is now. I was then the architecture critic of the Miami Herald, and probably I knew every road in Miami better than anybody else at that point, except maybe a mailman. So we got in the car and they said, can we drive across this causeway, the Venetian Causeway? And then they said, could we drive back? And I said, well, sure. I'm thinking, what? And then they said, can we drive back again? And then after we'd made these 5 trips, they looked over and they said, what's that over there? Pointing at the Julia Tuttle. So up we drove, up Alton Road to the Julia Tuttle. We went across the Julia Tuttle, and then we went back across the Julia Tuttle. And while we were on the Julia Tuttle, they pointed at the 79th Street Causeway and said, what's that? Can we go see that? And I was dense. I wasn't getting it. I didn't know why I was driving them across the causeway. And they said nothing, zero, nothing, silence.
Jeanne-Claude and Christo walked into my office. They were recommended by an attorney who was an environmental lawyer in Tallahassee. Christo immediately started telling me who he was. And Christo is very expressive, and he has quite an accent. And all of a sudden, Jeanne-Claude, who's equally exotic and dramatic, says, Christo, stop that. Look behind his desk. He has the surrounded islands on his wall. In fact, look carefully. It says surrounded islands. It was one of your first works, and you didn't spell it correctly in the art. Christo will come up with an idea, and then he will do what someone would think in architecture would be a rendering. But in this case, this is the art. The money that he would pay for the project, the entire installation and all the people associated with it would come from the artwork. And that caused people to not exactly understand what this was about.
The opposition was not knowing what it was, not understanding it. And there was no way to describe it. He's going to take fabric that floats and put it, why? Why would he do it? Can't we use that money someplace else? Was a recurring theme. No one would believe that the artist funded the project himself. That we who bought the artwork, the renditions, the anticipation of what the project was going to be, was funding it.
Suddenly, these little spoiled islands that no one had paid any attention to, they decided that it was going to create all kinds of havoc for the wildlife. There were some people worried about ospreys. There were some people worried about manatees. There were people worried about the fish.
It was a little bit harrowing. I mean, you had people that really didn't like it, and you never knew when there would be a hearing, or you'd have to go somewhere and explain it. The Count of Antichristo, the person who opposed the project, was clever. So he wrapped himself and others, I guess, in garbage bags, plastic garbage bags. And he stood at the courthouse and he said, I'm the Count of Antichristo. So he had gone to the city of Coral Gables, and they had decided that they would have a hearing on this. So I got in my car and I went down there and I explained that this wasn't going to be in Coral Gables. And we'd already gone to the League of Municipalities, which included all the different cities, and they had approved it. And they said, we don't care. We're voting against it. So they proceeded to vote against it. It didn't have any consequence. They could say they were vigilant about more things than they had to be.
That's beautiful. It is.
I think it's exciting for Miami to be doing things like this.
It's avant-garde. Crazy, I think.
Ugly.
We will undoubtedly be the focus of tremendous international publicity.
There is clear and present danger.
Everybody can paint on canvas, but everybody can't wrap islands.
I think it's a waste of money, actually.
and I think it's great.
It's just crazy. I don't know how people call it art.
It's different than all of the things that most artists do.
People are arguing and talking about it constantly, and that's what's so exciting about it.
Pink plastic. Well, I don't know if you want my comments for it. It doesn't sound too appealing.
Well, in a sense, art means whatever meaning you attach to it, and it cannot ever be the same for you as it can be for me.
When the project was proposed, I was chairman of the Biscayne Bay Management Committee. My initial reaction was, hey, this bay is beautiful enough without putting a bunch of pink propylene in the bay. And I was focused predominantly on the environmental aspects of the restoration, and so this was not something that I would have thought of as part of the restoration of the bay.
The most dramatic thing, I guess, that happened was the county commission meeting.
It finally came before the county commission for I think they called it a Class 1 permit.
There was a whole negative presentation, and then the Christo's attorneys and back and forth, and it was just before lunchtime, and they were getting ready to take a vote.
Because I am an incurable optimist, I knew it was going to pass. There was no question about it. What on earth could you be against?
But at the time, as I said, I was really focused on the environmental aspects, and I sort of forcefully led the charge against it, made the motion to defeat it, and it carried 5-4. So the project was dead.
We were going to be in the centerpiece of art in the world, and it was defeated. And I fell apart.
When I went out into the lobby to go to lunch, Jeanne-Claude approached me and Christo approached me, and very humbly and very kindly they said, you know, we understand, we respect your position on this. Can we take you to lunch and discuss it a little bit more? And as I recall, I just posed a very straightforward question to Christo. I said, explain to me why this is art. And it didn't take me long to realize how really ignorant I was. It was art, because anything that teaches you something or moves you can be classified as art. And this taught the world about Biscayne Bay. Since I had made the motion and was on the prevailing side under Robert's rules, I could go back to the commission after lunch and move to reconsider the last vote, which is what I did. I needed some other justification other than I realized that I was wrong. And I suggested kind of meekly, could you create something for the base, like maybe 1,000 images of the project after it's completed that you would number and sign? And we sold them for $150 a piece. And we garnered $150,000 for the Biscayne Bay Trust Fund. So it really was a significant impact on the health of the bay.
Ralph, Biscayne Bay is in the pink, or the pink is almost in the bay if you prefer. In either case, Christo is on the verge of wrapping it up.
Pink polypropylene. This is what Christo will use to wrap the islands, and it will take 6.4 square million feet of it.
We had worked with the Christos at the library and tested the fabric. We put pails of water on top of the old main library, which is Biscayne Boulevard and Flagler Street, and filled the pails with water from the bay. And then each day, for 2 weeks, we would take a piece of fabric out and send it off to be evaluated to see if the colors were stable and were holding.
This was very artistic, but it was all engineered. Christo had his own attitude about what the shape should be. Each island was different. And so the fabric around it was part of the art, the configuration.
The engineers were phenomenal.
Oh, the engineers were incredible.
There were so many things that had to be done and problems solved, things thought out.
And
so that it all got taken from
the islands they were also different.
Yeah.
Yes, each
so
one.
It was like cutting a dress or something for someone.
By spring of this year, preparations for the Pink Project reached a fever pitch. More than 400 paid helpers were recruited from the local community. In Hialeah, factory workers sorted and sewed more than 6 million square feet of pink polypropylene. Engineers pored over plans, and workers out in the bay began planting more than 600 specially made anchors to hold the Surrounded Islands project in place. The idea to get everything in order for one grand unfurling May 4th.
Before the project in '83, I called Jeanne-Claude and thinking I would take my vacation and come for a couple of weeks in the water. And she said, when can you show up? And I sort of went, it's December, January 5th. I had a full-time job. I had a husband who was a prosecutor. I had a 7-year-old daughter. I had no idea how I was going to pull that off, but I was coming and I was going to work. Jeanne-Claude directed me to find an office on South Beach. And I'm like driving up and down, and here are all these derelict hotels falling down, you know, the Versace mansion in ruins. And I'm thinking, why? How in the world? Why does she want an office here?
In the early 1980s, Miami had discovered or really rediscovered color. And the Art Deco district, most significantly, was being painted up like a sunset. The colors of the Art Deco district were instrumental in its rediscovery and its reclamation. It had been there, but nobody could see the details and nobody could really see the architecture. And then there was a designer named Leonard Horowitz who painted what was then Friedman's Bakery in ice cream colors, in like sherbet lime green and lavender and pale pink and light blue. It's amazing to think that a few gallons of paint could spark an entire preservation movement. The Cardozo had been redone, and the Victor had been redone, and the Carlisle, I think, was on its way to becoming a yellow hotel, all thanks to Andrew Capitman and Margaret Doyle, who then took in all the Christo workers and put them up.
Jeanne-Claude understood the importance of that architecture. And then when her collectors started coming in near the end of the project, she has us putting all the European collectors in the Art Deco hotels. And Barbara Capitman and the Miami Design Preservation League have been working very hard trying to preserve a lot of those buildings. And every day I would have to call and see if there were any rooms fixed up, prepared yet.
Just hanging outside Ocean Drive, outside the Leslie Hotel, just to see if we saw this guy, not even thinking of approaching him, but it's like, oh, there he is. Christo, this guy that has really conceptualized this work with his wife, and it's going to happen, and maybe feel his energy. But simultaneously, we were being introduced in a more unconscious way to this really futuristic city in ruins, which was Miami Beach. And it was Christo really that introduces me to Miami Beach at that moment.
There was something new under the sun this morning on Biscayne Bay. In addition to the gold of sunrise and the blue of the bay, there was pink. Yards and yards of pink polypropylene slowly unfolding. It was P-Day, Pink Day, -1 and counting. After 2.5 years of planning and pleating, not to mention cutting and sewing, Christo was less than 24 hours away from completing his most ambitious project, Surrounded Islands. And how was it going?
Very well.
Today's principal task was positioning the booms with the fabric around each of the 9 islands. A small army of paid volunteers pushed and pulled the booms into place. Others laid sturdier pink fabric at the shoreline to prevent the lighter, more buoyant fabric from chafing and tearing.
10 people told me last night that we should stop and take a rest, and I was so revolted because I said, nobody would ever tell a pregnant woman who is giving birth, why don't you go to the movies for 2 hours, take a rest, and finish it afterwards? It's ridiculous.
Christo doesn't expect to silence his critics when he unfurls this fabric tomorrow morning, but he may convince them that a work of art doesn't always have to hang on a museum wall. On Biscayne Bay, Michael Putney, Channel 4 News.
The excitement in Miami was the assembling, the building. My friends were out in bathing suits for a week, moving that gorgeous fabric, which shimmered. It sat on the top of the water and absolutely shimmered. It was just magnificent. And the whole physical process of putting it together was an art piece in itself.
It was amazing to see this kind of artwork being produced by such a large community, people from all over. So we wanted to do it. My best friend, Jose Marin, and I went to the Pelican Harbor Yacht Club and joined in.
We arrived to this magical world of pink, of styrofoam, of people with altoparlantes, como se llama, megaphones. This, for me, in one split of a second, was the world. It was a beautiful blue day. There was drama, there was production, and there was that insane pink in the background laying around, and this energy, it felt like the time when a hurricane comes, that there's this collective unifying force in the community. We were all of a sudden a family, no?
At any moment at the harbor, there was hundreds of people. You had like reporters, photographers, onlookers looking, workers. There were over 100 at any time. There were different crews going out, doing different things. People were running boats, people were running materials and supplies.
I was part of the 400 people that rolled out the propylene on the first islands. What I remember most was Christo got up in front of these people, most of them very young, held the permit in his hand and said, if there is one violation of one provision in this permit, that he would consider the project a failure, and that everybody had to read the permit, understand it. There were many little things in there. There the requirement, for instance, that there be a boat circling every one of the islands 24 hours a day, just in case a bird got trapped under it or there was some other problem that they could address immediately.
Those islands in Biscayne Bay are spoil banks. They are made of rock and sand, dredged from the 15-foot deep intercoastal waterway. Australian pine seeds carried by the winds took root and covered the islands with greenery. Over the years, boaters covered the islands with beer cans and picnic debris. But look at them today. They're beautiful centerpieces for giant pink petals draped around them, appearing worldwide on TV and in newspapers and magazines. The islands, which we ignored, have now become a global showpiece for Miami and at no cost to taxpayers. Thank you, Christo. We were too close to the trees to see our forest.
Miami has got the most incredible light and the most wonderful textures and the most beautiful skies. And these funny little spoiled islands surrounded by this beautiful pink fabric that was moving. It was a very sexy project. You could hear it. The water was sort of lapped, so there was a sound element to it. During the day, it would change. The light in the morning, you became very aware of the light in the morning and how the light would change throughout the day. So there were all these subtleties, but it was a gorgeous, gorgeous project. It was such a beautiful gift for Miami.
I mean, for 13 days, it was the buzz of the community. Everybody was trying to get on one of the causeways that spanned the Biscayne Bay so that they could see it. But I remember specifically one day coming home from work, early sunset, and I was headed on Broad Causeway headed east. So behind me in the west was sunset and these magnificent colors. And I looked to my right, it was one of the islands was just south of Broad Causeway, and the light from the sunset was being reflected off of the pink propylene, which was in the water and kind of moving, because the water was moving. So there was this almost an iridescence in the trees. The trees were being illuminated, and at the same time, they didn't appear real because there was this multicolor light being reflected off of the propylene into the trees.
It exists, and then it's gone. It reminds me of a great jazz solo. It reminds me of a great pas de deux in ballet. It exists, and then it exists in your mind.
It wasn't easy come, but it looks like it will be easy go for Christo's Surrounded Islands project. Now, it took Christo and some 400 volunteers 4 days to put this pink fabric around 11 islands in Biscayne Bay, and as of this hour, one has been completely dismantled. Shortly after dawn, Christo's crew started to take apart what they so carefully put together less than 2 weeks ago. Divers brought up buoys and anchor lines that held the styrofoam booms in place, and workers on shore unfastened the pink polypropylene fabric. When the whole contraption was free, a tug slowly pulled the fabric up Biscayne Bay to the old Enterama site. It may not have been part of Christo's original plan, but from the air, even this final stage of the Surrounded Islands project looked like art.
It was beautiful. Everyone really couldn't help but be amazed by what art was and what it could be to their lives. It really changed me.
Part of what made Surrounded Islands so welcome was it was just beautiful. For me to cover the process in which it was finally permitted, and then to see the construction and to see the finished project was one of the great joys, pleasures, delights, and profound experiences of my career.
It's interesting that the two greatest art projects in Miami through my 60-some-odd years of history here have been Christo, which cost us nothing and brought us incredible international acclaim, and the second was Art Basel. Cost the taxpayers nothing, not a single cent. We make money from the cabs, the lunches, the dinners, the hotel rooms, the condos that are sold, the cars that are sold. Make a list of the economic positive impact that comes from these kinds of projects.
It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to be part of.
I think it motivated us to do more. And after he was gone, and that was goodbye to the pink fabric and all that, we had to continue doing things and doing exciting things. And I think that was a great legacy.